So you think you don't have this, or you think you can't have this quality at a level that would be beneficial. Do you know why you think that? Do you know who told you that? Is it something you came up with yourself? And is it true and useful? I would say that Weaving Fate in 6 ways were both me sharing things that I was really solid on and had deep history with. And this was much more, this is the stuff I'm still working on, a lot of it. Some of it, I would say it's half and half, but, and that's important, and that it doesn't stop. One of those warnings that I think I tried to get in all my books is that if you practice magic, the shit will be stirred. Because part of what happens is whether you ask for it explicitly, and I always suggest you do, because I think it's actually easier, or you don't, you get changed.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore magic, folklore, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. For episode 78, we are joined once again by the great Aidan Wachter for an exclusive first interview on his new book, Changeling, A Book of Qualities. So what is the book Changeling about? Well, its description is as follows. Changeling considers the craft as a vessel, a container for ideas and approaches that help clarify the path to sovereignty and effective practical magic. It looks at the qualities and practices that, when integrated into life, can lead to a more beneficial understanding of self and the world. Changeling helps us deftly navigate the complexities of having a meaningful praxis and seamlessly weave magic into the whole fabric of our life. In the show, we go over the process of writing the book, how it affected Aidan more deeply than his previous outings, and how the process of transformation is a constant and not a linear process. It's a wonderful conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. I always enjoy talking to Aidan, so it was a great pleasure to record this. And in the Plus show, we discuss further how the power of transformation, how power in general can be quite gentle, but still produce cataclysmic changes. And interestingly, Aidan takes us to the elemental qualities that he attributes to his collection of work. We also get into being in the moment, to being present, and having discernment about where you spend your time. And it's good stuff. It's useful stuff, and I hope you guys get a lot from it. Now, if you'd like to hear the Plus show, then you can always sign up for my Patreon for the extended show and a host of other benefits. And to that end, before we start, I'd like to thank my Ankh patron members, Icaro, William O, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, Pamela, Michelle, Merrily, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Austin, Ali, Cardias, Brennan, Tyler, Madeline, Jorge, and Tony. And welcome to Savannah. Right, before we start, just a heads up that we will be, myself and my creative partner on the Sigil Engine, will be starting a Kickstarter, hopefully this side of Christmas on Kickstarter. So watch out for that. It'll be across, we'll release the information and the promo marketing material for the new Sigil Engine app proposal across social media, the usual places. So if that's your bag, keep an eye out for that. And obviously I will let everyone know on Instagram and on Patreon. And just before we start, if you're looking for any information about Aidan's books, check the show notes. They'll all be there. And right, okay, let's get on with the show. Aidan Wachter, it is so lovely to see you. You're very welcome back to the Spirit Box.
Thank you for having me again.
No, my absolute pleasure. And today I'm really excited to say we're going to talk about your new book, Changeling.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've been very lucky to have read it and really enjoyed it. Or an earlier version, and really what I wanted to kind of ask in terms of kind of getting the conversation going is what fundamentally well, I guess give us a top line of what the book's about, but what fundamentally prompted this piece of work for you?
So the top line of what the book is about is it's a book looking at witchcraft as a conceptual container more than like a religious thing, or even a kind of social movement, or all the other things. Those things are all involved in there, but that's really what it is. And what that brought up for me was like, well, what are the things then that kind of might go into making up an effective witch as qualities? And so that's why it's called a book of qualities. And yeah, it really came about because I was trying to write another book, and my allies kept like waking me up in the night and saying, no, write a witch book. And I was like, what are you talking about? But in the end, it made sense to me. So
fantastic. Well, what was I going to say is, incidentally, I don't know how many of the show's listeners indeed fans of your work, but I read that book entirely in your voice.
That's funny, isn't it?
It really, it has even the timbre and pace of your voice. Your prose seems to reflect it. It's really interesting.
Well, one of the things that I figured out early on is that I can't tell how things read until I read them out loud.
Right.
And so there's a couple different points where the thing gets read out loud and then edited to basically how I speak. So I'm unsurprised by that. But I used to have that. I had that experience. I had an old LP from the John Giorno Poetry Systems of William Burroughs, reading some of his pieces. And that completely changed my experience of Burroughs as a 20-something person. Was like, I can't read anything that I know is by him without that same thing going on. I could totally just hear it rolling.
Brilliant. So your allies prompted you to write a witch book, and you spoke about the qualities and kind of how you segment the various characteristics that are important, from your perspective, and important for a witch, or beneficial to a witch. Can you take us through some of those?
It was an interesting process because again, I didn't know what they meant, because I've always practiced witchcraft, but I've never kind of kept that as a personal primary identity.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that's their world, and that's not been mine. I've always been a very eclectic magical practitioner of some sort, but and so I kind of was diving into kind of revisiting history, some of the stuff that I talk about in the introduction, Leland, Zoradia, and Margaret Murray, and then the Wiccan stuff that came after it that I was exposed to, and things like Paul Hewson. And I couldn't see kind of the point that that the allies were suggesting. Like, why do you want me to do this? There's 80 million books on the craft, right?
Yeah.
And I don't remember at what point it kind of kicked up that I was like, well, what do I think are kind of the qualities that would be beneficial, or that I have gained from the craft, or learned to look at from that? And so that's where that kicked up. And that was ideas like, there's a really strong current of kind of, though it's not one of the qualities specifically, of agency within that. Like so if we think about the witch is clearly an agent of change, right? There's not really that's always a present thing. And then there's a massive stream of kind of sovereignty running through the piece. And then it kind of sent me down a bunch of rabbit holes too, looking at what do I think is relevant in there, and what makes it different from some other kind of magic. And again, as you know, because it's got hundreds of them in there, I guess, probably 100 at least, but it was charming. And this idea of that, I started looking into charming, like, if we're looking at roots of words, what is this, And so that really kicked up a big piece. And then it became a place of like, how can I generate something that is not so much another spell book or another manual, but that somebody could use to kind of recenter or reground themselves in the things that actually give them power as a practitioner. And so that's really what the qualities are. Those are the things that I always go back to that allow me to kind of find that place when I'm messed up.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm, you know, I think that's the level of value to that. And I think that differentiation you pointed out being that this isn't another spell book, although, you know, you do have information in there that is helpful in people's practical stuff. I think it's, you just form these guardrails going, this stuff is useful for you, irrespective of, you know, what your day-to-day practice is. These components to how you approach the world and your practice will be beneficial, and it really comes across really strongly, you know, and it's quite powerful, you know, in places. You know, there was a couple of places where I had to kind of stop reading and really think about what you said a bit and kind of what it meant to me, because it feels like it's, even though it's, you know, there's very personal sections in it when you describe your own life and place, but the qualities you describe, it feels like you're really reflecting on what you've learned, and it feels like there's a mentorship in the book. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think also there's like the thing that is, it does, and then I'll digress a little bit. The thing that was the most interesting for me in writing this was it brought me back to my earliest kind of encounters with magic, which I found witchcraft kind of simultaneously with the Temple of Psychic Youth. I found witchcraft a little bit earlier than I found Topi, but and so part of it is, I would say it's really it's a book of remembering, in the sense that these are things that I have found important to remember, and they're things I forget all the time. And so that's one of the things that I really wanted to make clear. Like, don't think that I've mastered any one piece of this, because I probably haven't. You know, that's not the intention here. This is not me preaching. This is what you got to be or what you got to do. And so that was the thing that I really began to see that the allies were getting at, was they were like, it would be helpful to you and to your readers to revisit kind of the things that you always need revisiting, you know? And so that's really how it came about, and really what it's about. And then, again, it was kind of like admittance of the constant presence of terrible poetry in my magic.
I've used some of it. It's not that bad.
Good,
you know?
good. Some of it's not that bad. Some of it I'm still like, well, that works for me, but I don't know why.
That's brilliant. You know, the book really doesn't come across in a preachy way at all, not remotely, and that's really why I felt kind of that the mentorship was kind of like it felt like the right kind of label for me in reading through it, because it was just like it's sage advice given gently, you know,
right.
And really useful.
One of the things that was so interesting to me diving into, again, kind of the word things, was as I was writing, I kept hitting words that I use, and was like, as I always do when I'm writing, I head into wordsense.eu. That's my dictionary that I use, and look at how these words are really used, because sometimes in magic we use things as specialized terms, and I know I personally use things as specialized terms, but it kind of pulled all these threads together, right? That Saul, who's active on Twitter, he pointed out from that one of the things that he and a number of other people have, but he's who comes to mind, that one of the things that they picked up from 6 ways was the idea of singing to your allies or singing to your materia or singing your spells. And I know that I'd always done that, but I hadn't really, well, not always, but after a certain point I'd done that. And so when I started looking at the charms and started seeing all of that stuff, that you go, these are really, charming is Carmen, which is sung incantations. Incantation itself has this aspect of poetics and singing. And then looking at things like Galder, from the Norse or the Saxon, being these kind of sung spells. And so that really kind of, that was the first anchor that I could see on the witchcraft end, was like, okay, we know this, right? If we think about witchcraft, we think about these rhyming incantations or kind of sung spells more than the more vibrating words of power from ceremonial magic or something, right? I think that that's like a common thread, and we see it in, whether it's in things like Macbeth or whether it's in more modern stuff, And so, it was just really, it was for me that this was the most kind of exploratory book, that it really did send me down this rabbit hole of like, where did I pick up these ideas that kind of informed so much of what I do, but happened over such a big span of time. It wasn't necessarily in my mind, And so that's, again, that I think becomes that kind of remembering for me, and also tied into all of the things around craft, right? And craft and practice and skills, and skill development in magic. And so that take that you have on it, I think makes sense, because I think of it like being in learning carpentry or something, right? Or learning jewelry in my case. It's like the people that taught me that kind of stuff, it wasn't preachy. It was just like, this is a way that you could explore doing this and see how it works. Because it might be of benefit, I don't think I ever would have been able to hang with anybody that was, this is the way. It doesn't, I hope it doesn't have any of that edge in it at all. But
it doesn't seem to, like when I reflect on it, for me, and looking through my notes, it was that kind of feeling of, this might help you, it's up to you whether you want to do it or not, which I think is resonant, that lands with a lot of people. People tend to pay attention. Well, that's a mass generalization I'm about to say there, but people tend to, I tend to respond better to guidance rather than instruction. And I think a lot of people in our culture tend to have that. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I'm just going to stop saying this. But I personally respond to...
I do as well. I'm with you on that.
So the language, you mentioned the language, right, and exploring some of the terms and getting back into kind of the root of the structure of the words, I guess the etymology, all that kind of stuff. And there's two pieces that I wanted to ask. So one is on the music. We'll come back to that. But the first is, or the singing rather. The first bit I wanted to ask you about is the title, Changeling. As we briefly spoke about before we hit record, obviously Changeling has real connotations for me in terms of like the theft of children and replacing them with wizened old fairies in Irish folklore. But I hazard the meaning's very different for you. So I wanted to kind of ask you where
the initial book, it's funny because it's like the initial book that I was going to write was really specifically directed at change. And it was looking at it more from a generalist viewpoint, not really looking at it as much as from a magical viewpoint, though that was going to be there. And so that was always in the back of my head. And, the working title of the thing was Witch Book. I knew that wasn't going to happen, but, Yeah, the changeling thing it kind of popped up one day when I was writing, and I was like, that's such an interesting word, because I have the same root, right?
Yeah.
It's like this idea of fairies being swapped out or children being swapped with fairies. And I really liked what I came to is ties into, how do I go? I'm going to go backtrack way back. Going back to root old witchcraft stuff, as far as modern witchcraft stuff. When I first came across Leland's Aradia, the Gospel of the Witches, have you read that book?
No.
You would be interested in that book. It's worth reading. It's 100 years old, so you can find it online. Okay. It's not very long. He had written a book. He was a kind of amateur anthropologist, and he had written a book called Etruscan Roman Remains, which is also really good. And he was kind of looking at old survivals from earlier times in Italy. And then Aradia came out, and Aradia was, it's a little book, and it's put forward as being information that he was given by an informant named Maddalena. And he, very much like Murray, is not taken particularly seriously by the academia, which is fine with me, because they don't really have any good records on this stuff. Like, what he has is mostly, in that book, is mostly the only source for it. And I'm sorry, my heater just kicked on, and it's very loud, so I don't know if you can hear it. But
I can't hear it. We're good.
Excellent. That's good. So Aradia is kind of an almost... It's an anarchic book in the sense of it's against kind of being ruled by outside forces.
Right.
It's not, Black Flag or anarchy or anything like that. But and it tells the story of how Diana and Lucifer, being the sun and the moon, ended up producing this child, Aradia, who was sent down to teach witchcraft to the people because they were so oppressed by the kings and the church at the time. And this was a tool that they could use then to, kind of regain their own control of their lives and regain their agency and sovereignty. And I remember reading it. I was in my early 20s and thinking that story that was very much tied into what now gets tied into this somewhat freaky, in the forms it's taking, conversations about witch blood. But it ties into the same ideas of the Nephilim, of witches being descended from some different thing, being kind of a subspecies or alternative thing. And I've always thought that those stories were really kind of there to provide permission to not feel like you fit in. Like, this was a myth you could grab onto and go, oh yeah, maybe I just did not quite like the people around me, right?
Yeah.
And so Changeling to me also felt a little bit like that. Like, we could kind of imagine that if we're viewing, not saying that the fairy thing didn't really happen, because I'm open to all sorts of things, but if folks having strange children was kind of what that was about more than anything else, right? We would probably diagnose them by something in the DSM or something, right? These days. And so it was a case of kind of like grabbing that idea of like, this is a great term for someone who doesn't fit in, who sees things in a different way, and who we might now say is, I think the terms that I used in the book is somewhere between neurodivergent or psychically divergent from the norm. And again, not using those in any clinical sense, but just as the idea of actually having some wiring differences, whether that being structural or whether that being psychic, coupled with then this idea of the witch as an agent of change. So I thought Changeling was a kind of a perfect word to reuse or to give a different form to there.
Yeah, I like it. It captures, say, for want of a better word, the kind of the alienness that a lot of people can certainly feel on their journey into magic, into witchcraft.
I think that's I think that's an important piece, and it's not something that everybody, I think, has. I think some people do not have it, because I've talked to people that don't. But for a lot of folks, there really is, and people talk about it in different places too. It's not strictly this, but they talk about being born in wrong times, being born to wrong parents, being born to wrong cultures. And I think that it speaks to that, because to me, that's always been a big impetus for me in magic, is like, this doesn't make sense. So is the not making sense a fault with me? Or is it a fault in the system? Or is it just that I'm not really designed to be in this structure in the way it is right now?
I like that. Yeah. And again, it ties back to that, because you do have a thread of that through the book, and along with the qualities, I think it's one of those books that, even irrespective of what stage you are in your career or proficiency in witchcraft, it's beneficial in twofold. As you said already, that period of reflection, and kind of go, yes, I need to focus on that, and that kind of recentering of kind of principles, but also the kind of the showing the way as well. But around that, you've got that envelope of going, yeah, you probably do feel different. There's an unsettled element there. There's a bit where you've never quite felt comfortable in be it in any of the areas you've described, your culture, your family, the time, or any kind of the predominant faiths you might have grown up in.
Right.
And I think that's a really comforting thing. I think because people to a degree, certainly in our culture, do feel that inherently, right? Be it through instinctual stuff, or be it through some of the stuff that's happening to them, right, whether they're experiencing, which does make one feel very, very different, right?
Well, I think that, one of the threads that was present for me is that there's and it's tied into the thing that I talked about in the intro about Changeling, is there's a point where you have to decide that whatever that is, or whatever it is that makes you not the kind of prototype of whatever is our current age prototype, which we've talked about that before, but I don't know what it is, but it ain't me. That we have to kind of like begin to at some point, and I think this is a big piece of where magic can be very helpful, decide that that's not a bug, but a feature, right? You go, okay, this is not me being unable. This is a source of a different kind of power. And I think that's a really useful thing. And this is not saying that, there's a lot of madness in the magical community about how you should be able to magic your way out of anything, even if it's a physiological issue or brain chemistry issues, which I totally don't believe in. Sure, some people might be able to, but to think that that's a good suggestion in general, we see lots of people suggesting that if you're not being successful in magic, you need to get off your meds, and that's not at all what I'm talking about. Right. And so I think and that's a lot of what the book is. If these are all places where you could go in and maybe claim a little more of that power and grab onto a little more of who you really are and shed some of that kind of contagion of the culture that was kind of a heavy theme in Weaving Fate, but is kind of a subtext in this one too, is going, so you think you don't have this, or you think you can't have this quality at a level that would be beneficial. Do you know why you think that? Do you know who told you that? Is it something you came up with yourself? And is it true and useful? And I think that's really that's a big theme through the Book of Qualities for sure. And it's something that I'm always coming back to. This book has churned up more shit for me than any of the other ones. This one totally, this one got into all my uncomfortable zones. Like, I know this, but do I do it consistently? No, over and over and over again, So this one is definitely the book that I will use the most out of all the ones that I have written.
Oh, that's brilliant. I really like that. I think, there's a certain amount in that we hear in kind of certain in magical culture of like you said, you should be able to magic your way out of X, Y, and Z. Or like there's a real focus for a lot of people on kind of like wealth magic and all that kind of stuff, and
right.
Which is helpful. I'm not going to I'm not going to die. Money makes things easier, right? Greases the wheels of life, But there's also kind of in some areas there's an undercurrent of kind of like, well, wealth equals success, and it doesn't. It's useful. It's a good tool, no doubt about it. But and I think one of the areas that kind of you were describing about kind of what is meaningful to me, where do I sit on certain things, that you start to kind of start to unpack, well, what actually are my values? My personal ones, not my cultures, not my family, but me. What are my values? And I feel that kind of in your book, you're painting that picture. You're peeling away those elements of saying you might feel like this in a way that you don't fit in, and then just start to kind of, through those qualities, start to kind of shave off that's not the right way of saying it, but start to kind of reveal more about kind of, well, who really are you? Are you asking yourself those questions?
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's interesting. It's like, and I've just caught myself saying that word, which I say every time I do these podcasts over and over and over again. I listened to the one that I did with Lexa Strata recently for the Lexicult podcast, and I say, that's interesting, over and over and over again. So we'll try.
I do the same thing.
I probably can't.
Go for it.
So we're going to try. And I think that's what I found so uncomfortable in working with the book. And so it was like going, okay, I get this piece on the surface, and there's days or months or years in my life where I've really embodied this quality hard. Mm-hmm. But at some point I let it go. And I'm not where I was when it was kind of fully active as it should have been. And so there's been a ton of that. And some of it is like specific to what you said, like, yeah, we all want to have enough, resource to get by. Mm-hmm. But we're now in this really interesting culture. And particularly it's like, this is true because of the being a writer in a community. We can kind of take on this idea from the outside that there is a need for all of the things that we see come with it, right? If most of what we see for wealth is either being a doctor, a lawyer, or being famous, those of us who aren't doctors and lawyers think we have to work towards some level of fame, right? And so part of this too was going, okay, that's not really true. It's not really what I want. It's not really, there's a level of engagement I created through, in my case, social media, that was beneficial. But it kind of hit a point where I went, okay, it's now a little more toxic if I'm not careful.
Yeah.
And so again, it's funny, like through the book, which is ridiculous, as you're preparing to launch the book, I'm kind of backing away from all that shit. Yeah. Because that's true to who I actually want to be and the kind of life I want to have. It's not comfortable. Mm-hmm. I have lots of fear around that because you go, oh, what if I disappear? Nobody gives a shit anymore.
It makes sense. Yeah,
it's an interesting process. But to me, the thing has been very revelatory. And it's even funny in the things that didn't make it in. Like there's a ton of stuff. There could have been double the number of qualities, but those are the pieces that I always really need. And somebody who's wired a little differently is going to have to come up with some others, you know.
Well, you'll laugh at this, but you're although it's in no shape or form kind of a subtext in the book, but basically it got me back in the gym, and it got me really kind of a lot more disciplined about what my food is. And I've lost a fair bit of weight, over the couple of months. And but that's what it kind of reset me in terms of my discipline, and it made me realize I was gaslighting myself about certain things, certain qualities, and as you say, sometimes they're really difficult. They're difficult conversations when you kind of realize I've been bullshitting myself for a long time.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of pain involved in that, but it's necessary. And I think the book can do it. That's what I mean about it's good for the kind of people entering the start of their journey, and actually people who are midway or in later stages of it, because it's got that kind of quality to make you self-reflect, which is hugely valuable.
Yeah, I thank you. That's definitely what it's done for me too. It was one of those things where I'd start writing on something and have to sit back and go, where am I with this right now? And that often meant that I would start writing something and then go to my journal or go to a sheet of pad of paper and go, okay, not cool. And I think it's important to talk about this stuff because we can often present, and it's one of the reasons why I did not go with traditional publishing, is they want you to present as kind of expert master kind of thing for the most part. And I'm not interested because it's not the case. But it constantly sent me back to my meditation practice is the tightest it's been in years because of writing this book. My sitting and actually something coming up and me getting pissed off at something and going, okay, why does this piss me off? Is this actually, because I know that's it's one of the subjects throughout a bunch of that section is how seriously we take ourselves and our responses to things is a choice. And it kept sending me back to that. And to going, okay, I can get really heated and really riled. There's a couple things that were in the version of the book that you read that are not in the lighter version, because it's like, that's just someplace that I got that triggers the fuck out of me. And I had to process it and go, okay, what's up there? Where's the good information in there? And where's the me just being pissed off at the world or pissed off at my past or pissed off at myself? So it kept kind of sending me back to that center place and sending me back to ground, and really trying to go, okay, what do I, and that's where the questions came out of too. There's a couple 300 questions in the book attached to the qualities. Was, what are the pieces that I don't ask when these things come up, that I take at face value, that isn't necessarily helpful, and again, it's like, it's all for me. This is all live stuff. There's a few in there, my situation with my allies is way more solid than it is in some aspects of my own mind. I have issues with kind of right speech, to use the Buddhist term. And so again, some of it's was incredibly uncomfortable to write, because you have to go, okay, how can I write this in a way that is truthful to who and what I am right now, and still give the most useful take that I can come up with right now. And the allies are beautiful in that way, because they're great guides to, yeah, this is important to share, even though it's something that you struggle with, and just be open that it's a struggle, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So to that end, you know, do you feel you wrote that book as much for yourself as for your readership?
I do. I think that was really, when the allies started saying, write the witch book, and I didn't know why that was. It was because of what that was, what that journey was for me. Because some of it was like funny. Like, it took me 50,000 words before I went. I think the thing that actually got me starting practical magic was Earth Power by Scott Cunningham. Totally uncool, right? For coming from the chaos world, or the ceremonial magic world. And so I went and reread it and went, yeah, you can see this in all of my work. You know, and so there was a lot of that unveiling of kind of roots. And then a lot that was just, that I feel was really my allies guiding me, like, this is stuff you struggle with. And so do a ton of your readers.
Right.
And so it's important for both you and your readers to have some, at least pointing in that direction. You know, so this one, yeah, definitely for me was was hugely, I would say that Weaving Fate in 6 Ways were both me sharing things that I was really solid on, and had deep history with. And this was much more, this is the stuff I'm still working on, a lot of it. Some of it, I would say it's half and half, but, and that's important, and that it doesn't stop. You know, I don't remember exactly how it's in one of the sections where I'm talking about the vessel. And it's, you know, comparing the vessel and the fact that we have to kind of empty ourselves to receive new things, and comparing this to taking out the trash. You did it yesterday, but you have to do it today too, and you'll have to do it tomorrow. And so this book was very much a reminder to me of that. Like, okay, I dropped the ball. Everybody drops the ball. You know, it's the nature of the work, and you just go, oh. You walk into the kitchen in the morning and go, it smells funky in here. I didn't take out the trash. Let's take out the trash. And try to remember that has to happen every day, even when I'm really busy.
Yeah. I like that motif, and you know, because I think about kind of personal transformation a lot, you know, and one of the fundamentals that I think is really valuable for people is to get away from the concept of linear progression. That there's always an upgrade, you know, that there's no regression, right? And it's like, that's just demonstrably not true.
That is absolutely not true.
Yeah. There is like massive regression, you know, and but how I tend to think about it, and I think about it in terms of tools. And I very much feel you kind of present the qualities as these tools or concepts, you know, for you to use. And it's like, at some stage, for all of us, we're all going to get a kicking. At some stage, you think you're at a certain level, you kind of find out, I'm not, right? You know, or I'm not yet. And
or I'm not now.
Yeah.
Maybe I was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like that. And it's just, that's what I love about this piece, this book. You know, the qualities are such a great touchstone to read back and reflect, and kind of, rather than start to kind of get into a situation where we deflect or we blame external things, you know, which, you know, external things will have a factor, but they're not generally the root cause for why we react. You know, there's something inside that is, as you mentioned already, that triggers a response or feeds a response. There's the external stimuli we will react to, but there's also kind of that question of like, well, who am I? And how you've broken down those qualities really allows, it certainly was for me, reading through it, to interrogate where I was against these qualities, and it's that litmus test. And I think, and again, I spoke about the timbre of your voice and how you speak in that mentorship, right? That it brought out in me an honesty in terms of how I was reading it. And I was, and that's what really worked for me. And I think it'll work for a lot of people, and I just joking about that kind of thing of like, the instruction, if it was kind of like, actually, you need to sort this out, my immediate response is like, all right, come on, it's like, exactly. Yeah. Fuck you. I'm not doing it, and it's like, but the way you take the reader on this path, framing it with your own kind of initial journey and where it took you, and is the piece still in it about the gentleman you met on the plane?
It is, but the context has been changed a little bit. I removed a lot of detail out of that story because I realized that was not really the relevant piece. But that was a very, and that's a critical piece in that book. Which I can kind of share, which is, I was a total freak as a child. And when I was 11 or 12. And so this would have been after my Man in Black experience.
Wow.
Since we've talked about that before.
Yeah, I have to talk to you about that again at some stage. But anyway,
my family flew and I sat next to a guy. They split us up because there were too many of us to fit on one aisle. And I was sitting next to a guy that seemed much older, but he might have been 30. I don't know. He was probably not wildly old man or anything, but, and I absolutely know because of the time I was reading some science fiction novel on the plane, and he asked me about it. And we started talking. And at the end of that thing, as we were landing, he totally could tell that I was like the weird kid and told me, basically, he said, you will hit a place where you're not under your parents' control to try and fit their mold, essentially. And you will get to decide who and what you want to be. And no one will be able to tell you otherwise. And that was hugely impactful to me because no one had ever told me anything like that. My family was not anything like the problem families that people have. And I love all of them, but we were not real functional.
Right.
And so that was not a message I ever got. I never got the message that you're strange and that's okay. Or that maybe that's not even a problem with you, that could be a problem with others,
Yeah.
And I've said before, my family just didn't know any better. They'd never been around people like me. And so that's a big piece in there, is that concept of like, and then it also ties into the sovereignty piece, right? Because as you were saying, these external things are very real and they do produce real impacts on us. But the only thing we really get to control, if we can't move outside of those, is how they affect us. And so that, that's if it's retrospectively, if I think about that, that no one can be able to tell you otherwise was not really accurate, that he said. But I get what he was saying. He's like, you won't have to let it define you. And I think that's a big piece of the book, is like, you get to choose how these things define you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was present in writing this book was because I became aware that there's a prison minister in the UK who has been has a bunch of prisoners who, whether they found them on their own or she brought them in, I don't know, has been working with 6 Ways of Leaving Faith.
Wow.
There's a Glitch Bottle podcast with her, Jackie Wynn. It's really good, but that also really brought a lot of that into me, because I was like, okay, I write about these ideas of sovereignty and being in control of yourself, but But there's a bunch of folks that are definitely under the thumb, whether it's of, the state in that way or in an abusive situation they can't get out of it this time. And so it brought all of that into like how internal those states have to be real, because everything can get taken away from you. That's just reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I get from my extremely limited understanding of Buddhism, is that idea that this stuff has to be you, because there's no control, really,
right,
beyond that. And one of the other early readers of that really pointed out that like some of this stuff is really interestingly tied into some aspects. I think they pointed out 3 or 4 pieces, the pieces about kind of thought, word, and deed, as being really tied into some Stoic thought, which I'm again limited reading there, but it made sense because that piece really comes from Buddhism, and I see a lot of relationships between those two things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll have to go and listen to the Glitch Bottle podcast. That's phenomenal. It's knocked me back on my heels a bit. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it did me too, and it's something I was aware of, but it came up when we were writing. I was working on, and we were doing editing on that. Some of the sovereignty related pieces was really looking at what is sovereignty, how do we deal with that concept when we're in situations that we are physically not able to control, where we do not get to choose what we do with, we're not able to walk away. Because that's always what I've always said is like, if it gets bad enough, you've got the option to burn it down and walk away, but you don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And that was that's an important piece that kind of changed the shape of the book. I think after the version that you saw,
right,
was really kind of going through those sections and going, is what I'm putting here useful given those situations as well? So I hope so.
Yeah. Excuse me. You mentioned the going through some of the qualities and going through some of the sections that you were proposing in the book helped you reflect on some areas that you by your own admission needed to work on to grow. Without going into any of the specifics, where has that gotten you to? Do you feel what it inspired in you, what it gently kind of nudged you along? Gently nudged, kick in the back. They could be, who knows?
Brick to the face.
Yeah. Where has that gotten you now? How have you changed since you wrote the book? Or completed?
Yeah, it changed a lot. One of the things that people, one of those warnings that I think I tried to get in all my books is that if you practice magic, the shit will be stirred. Because part of what happens is whether you ask for it explicitly, and I always suggest you do, because I think it's actually easier, or you don't, you get changed in ways that allow the outcome you are looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think I am absolutely still in process with the work that the book has got me doing. But I am, I would say generally I'm far clearer than I have been on more levels at once than I think at any point in my life. And my sense of direction is really solid. Like that's the thing that I think that has really happened for me is it's like a really kind of Yeah, it's again, we can kind of believe our own hype, as we were talking about earlier, and think that we are someplace that precludes having to look at that anymore.
Yeah.
And this was a massive correction for me on that. Like, no, that's not really true.
But it's a good way to find it out. It
was fabulous.
Yeah.
And the more that I experienced that, the more that I liked the book, which is always, part of the issue with writing books is you end up reading and rewriting so many times that you end up kind of hating the book on some level. And this one I found I liked more and more.
Right.
Though it irritated me and got in my face and pissed me off.
Yeah.
It kept me up at night. Because that was a real thing. There was a lot of, there were a couple months where I had the notepad by the bed because I'd wake up and be like, I don't think that's right. I don't think I can write that way right now. Or I know now what I need to do. And then that influenced some of the practices or some of the questions.
Right. Fantastic.
And then, having early readers call me out on stuff was very good too. Like, your triggers are showing. Maybe you want to look at those a little bit before you rewrite this.
Brilliant. I'm laughing a bit because it's just, you've kind of triggered a memory for me just in that kind of like where you think you're in a place where you're not. And I found that out in martial arts a few times in various sparring sessions where I thought when you find out there's another level
absolutely.
And you're on the wrong side of the level getting your ass handed to you.
Absolutely. And that's, again, it's a constant, right? It's not, I think if we're learning and if we're trying to grow and if we're open to growing, that is constant.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. I don't see any way that would not be that way. But I think that, again, we have this story right now that we've been living in for a long time, which is that we are in this constant state of progress towards higher states of being, right? And this is really the kind of cultural story of the West, at least, right?
Yeah.
That where we are now is demonstrably and qualitatively and in all ways better than what was before, which I don't think is true personally. I think in ways it's true, but not as a total. But that's kind of the myth, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the powerful myth. And so the myth is that we climb and we just get higher and higher. Where I think kind of reading Martin Shaw comes to mind when he kind of talks about the recurrence of these mythic cycles a bit. And then kind of the vision that I have is that we go through these processes and it's like as that spiral is built very gradually. And it's kind of, and I think about it in like meditative practice or magical practice, that one way that we can think of that is that we are, if we're like a blank record, right, that is filled with just scratches, just noise, which is not a bad way to view how most of us are as a baseline, with some tracks laid in that are different pieces that we came up with on our own or that we were raised into. Any kind of serious magical or spiritual practice partially is becoming very intentionally to carve that groove. And that over time we try and carve it deeper and deeper, so that it begins to become the primary signal rather than all the noise. And so that's what, I mean, I really saw that in the book, and that was really where, it's funny. It's like I'm doing the thing that I talk about in there, even though I just wrote the thing of going in and kind of every few days, like let's pick a number and see what it has to say and see what I think about it today, because it changes. And that was the other thing that was really interesting writing. It was going like, I have different things to say or to think about these things every day. And so, again, to me, it'll be the most useful thing that I've written so far. The other stuff I know, and I generally don't lose track of. But these are really the pieces that are the pieces that I get, that I lose. And it's why, again, in all my stuff, practice is pushed so damn hard. It's just this one was a fascinating, it was and is a fascinating process.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully we'll get the links to that when this goes out. The links should be in the show notes.
Yep.
Yeah. For everyone to jump in.
Be able to explore the wonders.
Yes, indeed.
Which hopefully we have not made sound too grim.
No, it's been massively beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, this one is not written as to be entertainment, but as always, I try to be entertaining.
Yeah.
And it definitely is it's the big workbook of the trio so far. This is the one that's like, this is not a read through and you're done.
Yeah. There's a lot of reflections going to happen. It's a wonderful book, and thank you for letting me read it. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for reading and giving me your feedback when you did. It was super beneficial. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Aidan. It's been wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Aidan. Wonderful as always. I really enjoyed that conversation and got a huge amount from it, and I hope you listeners did as well. I'm Darren Mason. Thank you for listening. Talk soon and take care. Bye.